Obviously, last night was another painful night, really, for Chelsea and their rebuild and life under Todd Boehly and Clear Lake. They're not out of the Carabao Cup, but losing 1-0 to a championship side in the first leg is going to be painful. A lot of their fans screaming for transfers to come in. There are some exits that are on the cards. We know that Maatsen has gone out on loan. Still, there's a lot of question marks hanging around the situation with Conor Gallagher. What's your understanding about his potential exit in January? Has that changed much in the last 7 days?
No real movement. It was not correct to my understanding, despite some reports in Italy that talks had started with Spurs. What's true is that Tottenham tried for Gallagher on deadline day, but their package was a maximum of 35 million and Chelsea wanted about 10 million more. Now I think Chelsea are looking for 15 or 20 million more in terms of the total package. I'm told that 45 million guaranteed plus bonuses is the type of offer, depending on structure, that might turn Chelsea's head. And the reality of the situation is that Chelsea are quite dispassionate here. They have a policy that if the player's heading into the final 18 months or year of the contract, they're for sale. Now, that doesn't mean that they're actively offering Gallagher, but they'll listen to offers should they arrive. At the moment, no offer has arrived. So it's going to take a large amount of money if Gallagher's going to go this window. And at the moment, there's no progress. It's true that Gallagher would like to stay and fight for his place. It's true that Pochettino values Gallagher as well. But within Chelsea's model, if an offer comes, then it won't just be those two that take a decision. And it's obvious that Gallagher could say no, but that's just a stopgap. Maatsen said no last summer when Burnley had an offer accepted and now has obviously been loaned out to Dortmund. And it's likely that he'll be sold in the summer. So players can change their mind. It's all very well saying you want to fight for your place and you want a new contract. And Mason Mount was the same. But if a new contract doesn't arrive, you start to think, what's the point in constantly saying, I want to stay and fight for my place, if the club are not going to offer me a new contract? So all options are still open with Conor Gallagher, but I think it's more likely in January that he stays, barring an offer of kind of total package 55 or 60 million. That's what Chelsea would ideally want. Maybe 3 or 4 million less, they might still consider it. But at the moment, there's no movement. And it's really hard to see how Spurs, having not wanted to pay more than 35 million, would suddenly consider an offer at around 55 million, despite that admiration for the player. The other consideration in all of this, which is partially why the freedom to challenge and debate is so important in Chelsea's model, is Pochettino's perspective is the now, because he's under a little bit of pressure. He's only got a 2-year guaranteed contract. The 3rd year is at the club's discretion, and he's nearly halfway through that. And he's likely to be assessed during the summer. And if Chelsea were to get knocked out to Borough, then there'll be even more pressure on him naturally. So Pochettino's thinking about the now. And at the moment, Conor Gallagher, along with Cole Palmer, is one of Chelsea's best 2 players. He's also the captain in the absence of Reece James and Ben Chilwell. So you can understand why Pochettino's thinking Chelsea would be nuts to let Gallagher go. But if you flash forward 6 months, or if you just do a hypothetical now of everyone's fit, and Chelsea might even bring in another midfielder, then I think if every Chelsea fan gave their desired starting 11, I think Conor Gallagher would only be in the starting 11 for 40 or 50% of those starting lineups. I think most Chelsea fans would pick Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. This is not a hypothetical based on form now or injuries. This is just flash forward 6 months and judge each player on their maximum ceiling and then pick your best Chelsea 11. I think in that midfield too, most would have Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. So then Gallagher is probably challenging with Lavia, with Leslie Okwuchukwu, and one more midfielder. And maybe Chelsea's board are thinking long-term. In 6 months' time, Gallagher won't be picked for captain because Reece James might be back and Ben Chilwell will be there. And Gallagher won't necessarily be picked on form because Moises Caicedo will be in the mix. And he played really well last night. He was probably the one positive for Chelsea. Enzo Fernandez is well liked. And Romeo Lavia hasn't even had a chance to prove himself. So you can understand why in the long term, even though it sounds ridiculous now because he's playing so well, some people at Chelsea might still feel like Gallagher will drop down the pecking order. And this is why there's still a chance at the right number that Gallagher could be sold. But if I was a betting man come the end of January, I think that it is more likely that Gallagher will remain. And then we have to work out whether there'll be a new contract, because if there isn't, then he'll almost certainly be sold in the summer if he doesn't leave in January.
Yeah, it's all a little bit, again, it all feels a little bit messy at the moment. As you say, you've got this situation with Chelsea where Conor Gallagher's starting a lot of games, but there's, the club seem open to kind of selling him. Poch is obviously thinking short term because he's got a short contract and he hasn't made the improvements yet. But Chelsea have to think, in my personal opinion, more on the long term. It's almost, you've got two opposing forces working at the same time, and that's never really going to help, personally, in my view, in terms of creating the kind of cohesion that is needed. And there's a question here from Mish, one of our members, that says, how has Poch not been sacked yet? Well, I know you're very close to Chelsea. What's your feeling towards their support of him as manager?
Well, I think that Pochettino may be scrutinised by the fan base, but is clearly not the only factor in Chelsea's inconsistency. So if you're going to scrutinise Pochettino, then game management, Levi Colwill at left back are definitely two very valid points. And substitutions have come under, I think rightly, a bit of scrutiny. But there's been injuries, and it's not the manager's fault if Chelsea keep creating big chances and missing them. The irony is they got more goals than under Graham Potter, but they should have twice as many goals. And if they had twice as many goals, they might have twice as many points. And a lot of the chances, like Palmer last night, Nicholas Jackson, players are getting into great positions and they're fluffing their lines. And there's not much more a manager can do than set up a system to create those chances. So if then fans feel the chances were not put away because the players are not good enough, then you could say that is on Pochettino, because last night, and I would agree with this, by the way, Amanda Broja should have started and Mudrik's pace should have come on earlier, because on the side that he was playing, Borough were struggling and tired, and they had so many injuries, and two of their injuries that went off were quite fast players, and one of the two that came on was a lot slower and was a fullback. So you had an opportunity for Sterling and for Mudryk to really stretch that Borough line. And then if you're using wide areas and moving sides and changing positions, and you've got a target man in the centre in Broja, I think that would have been really effective. So hindsight's a wonderful thing. And Chelsea also could have scored twice with Cole Palmer in the first half, and then the floodgates might have opened, and we're only halfway through the tie. So there's a whole range of different factors in all of this, but that's probably the Pochettino side that you could criticise. But if you're of the belief that Nicholas Jackson isn't good enough, then that is on the recruitment team, of which Pochettino is not really a figure with any kind of enhanced power. And similarly, if you believe that big chances are just being missed, maybe one day they'll all start going in. And at the same time, there's injuries, and Pochettino's only half a season in. So I think there's lots of variables here. And I understand why it's easy to scapegoat a manager, but I think that there's more to it than that. I think that this is about a project that needs 4 windows to develop a team that's young, have them mature, and maybe next season is the real time to judge Chelsea. And if the ownership feel that that is also true, then Pochettino will be given time. If Pochettino loses to Borough and goes on a run of 6 or 7 bad results, then Chelsea fall into the bottom half of the league. They may then have less points than they did under Graham Potter. And football's a results-driven business. So there's always going to be that slight paradox between wanting to give a manager time and realizing that football is a results-driven business. But the reason Pochettino hasn't been sacked is almost the same reason that Potter wasn't sacked. And that is because, unlike under Roman Abramovich, the ownership group are trying to be less cutthroat. So with Graham Potter, he could have been sacked after the Spurs loss heading into an international break. He could have actually been sacked before the World Cup when I think Chelsea lost to Newcastle. He could have been sacked after the loss to, I believe it was Southampton at home, but Chelsea fans correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. And then eventually he was sacked. And Roman Abramovich would have sacked Graham Potter at all of those junctures. So the Chelsea ownership are delaying And I would expect the same with Pochettino as well, to try and get to the end of the season and then review in a two-way sense what the issues are, if there are still issues, and to try and get Chelsea finishing the season in European or Champions League form, regardless of where they finish. So they then build momentum, then have a summer. And then I think you'll see a more cutthroat approach, because if they get to that point, they'll then say to Pochettino, you finished the season strong. You've had another window and a summer window. You've had another pre-season. He would then have to start, I think, the first 10 games very strongly. Otherwise, he'd be under real pressure. But it would be surprising to me if he's sacked any earlier, unless there's obviously a catastrophic run of results. And Chelsea fans may be shouting now, saying, well, it is a catastrophic run of results. And by, I suppose, Abramovich standards, they're right, because 1 or 2 losses in a Chelsea season is always a mini crisis. It has been historically since the 2000s, but now I think there's an acceptance. And the last thing I would say is that Abramovich's cutthroat changes worked because Chelsea had a senior core. I'm not so sure that Abramovich's cutthroat changes would have worked with the same managers coming in and this squad, because the squad that those new managers inherited were far more experienced and they upped their game. And they got behind a new manager coming in. Now I think the players are a bit more passive and needing of development and instruction, because the average squad age is so much younger. And I don't think that the constant chopping and changing under Abramovich would have worked with this squad. And I think that's why also the Chelsea ownership plan on being a little bit more patient. And again, people will be shouting and screaming, saying, we don't care. We're Chelsea fans. We pay hard-earned money. Just sack the guy. I'm not in any way diminishing that view, because I'm trying to give you an objective opinion as a journalist, and fans rightly are more blinkered and want instant success. And why not? It's Chelsea. It's a massive club. They should be in the Champions League. They should be winning trophies. It's a fall statistically from grace, regardless of the long-term project. And I can sit here until I'm blue in the face and say patience, project, and people will be saying another word to me beginning with P, and the second word is R, and the third letter is I, and the fourth letter is C, and then I won't complete that spelling. But you'll get abuse if you try and say that, because these other P words like patience and progress and project are probably quite irritating now to Chelsea fans. So hindsight, again, may be a wonderful thing. And by the time we get to mid-August, the Chelsea lineup, the Chelsea injury situation, the Chelsea hierarchy, and the Chelsea performances all may gel. And then everyone will say, oh, thank God, they did have a plan. It did work. But right now, it is very easy to scrutinize and criticize. And I don't blame fans for that. But I still don't think that the ownership will be too swayed by that at this stage. And that's why there's nothing imminent to me that suggests that Pochettino's job is under threat in the days and weeks to follow.
On Chelsea, there was another story I read today that came from Simon Phillips, somebody that I know that you are very familiar with, and the reports that came out from him is that the Chelsea co-owner Egbali has held positive talks with the agent of Victor Osimhen. We all assume that is more for a summer signing. Are you aware of any progress around this yourself? Have you had any conversations regarding this?
Yeah, I think with Osimhen, we're going to have to wait. Like you say, I'd be really surprised if anything definitive happens in the coming weeks. We get a lot of reports about pre-agreements, and it's not impossible, by the way, that Chelsea try and pre-agree something with a striker. But whether that's Osimhen remains to be seen, because he's only just signed a new deal, and therefore he may wait and take his time. And I think sometimes we look at this through the prism of only Chelsea. And we need to remember that Osimhen is driving Osimhen's exit. And it doesn't matter what Chelsea do. If Victor Osimhen wants to wait and take his time, that's what he'll do. And why, if you think there's going to be multiple suitors in the summer, would you commit to one unless you're 100% sold on the project? Because right now, Osimhen doesn't know where Chelsea are going to finish. He doesn't know whether Arsenal or anyone else is going to enter the race. He doesn't know whether Napoli are going to somehow win the Champions League and he's going to want to stay. He doesn't know whether Saudi are going to come calling again. So does he need to rush his decision? Or is this more about Osimhen signing a new deal with an out that will likely provide a valuation yardstick rather than be triggered, and then his future could well be resolved in the summer? And I think that all suitors know that. It's not going to happen in January. And the idea that Chelsea are reaching out or Chelsea are starting talks is, at this stage anyway, let's see if it changes during the window, but largely exaggerated. And the reason for that is because to sign a player at any point, you have to talk to the agent, you have to develop relationships, you have to give a consistent narrative. You can't just rock up in summer and make a bid. And Liverpool are the best at this. I've said this many times. They spend years developing relationships with the family and giving a consistent narrative and explaining the project and ultimately trying as best they can to get players to accept Liverpool, the culture, the city, the club, the squad, and the manager, even if they don't end up signing them. And that's what Chelsea need to start doing to land a big name. This won't just be about Osimhen having a Chelsea shirt and wanting to emulate Drogba. That will be tempting, but the structure, the package, the game time, the manager, it all has to add up. So if you're Osimhen now, and Chelsea come calling and say, come and join us, to a big club, we'll pay you well, we'll give you a 7-year contract, and you'll lead us into the Champions League, and you'll win it, and you'll emulate Didier Drogba. Victor Osimhen's going to probably say, I don't know what you've got next season. I don't know if you've even got Champions League. I don't know where you're going to finish in the league. You can't categorically guarantee who's going to be in charge at hierarchy level or at manager level. What about Nicholas Jackson? What about Amanda Broya? What about even others that could break through, like David Datro Fofana? And he'll look at formation as well. So he's a fit in that formation, but it's also not a 4-4-2. So there's only one spot, which means that if someone else starts scoring goals, you're out of the side, because Osimhen's not going to drop any deeper like a Christopher Nkunku. So there's loads of questions, and the answers probably won't come until a little bit further down the line. So it's really easy to create a headline and sort of say Chelsea have started talks, but I don't think we'll get much clarity on Victor Osimhen until later in the year.
Thank you very much regarding that view.